Welcome back to my Final Fantasy series, where we'll be going over the main themes inherent to the core of the franchise. I started this entry the same day I completed the first. Needless to say, the differences between the two were quite shocking, primarily in the leveling systems, dialogue mechanics, and map design, which won't be our focus here, but I do generally agree with the criticisms surrounding those mechanics. Instead, I want to explore certain ramifications of the primary theme here that we didn't regularly see in games of the time. So to explore the consequences of our actions, we're rebelling in Final Fantasy II. Major spoiler warning. We enter the kingdom of Palmecia, as it's suddenly and violently attacked by the Empire, thus beginning a conquest for continental domination, wielding the power of the underworld. The Castle Flynn, headed by Princess Hilda, leads a rebellion, but is thwarted by the Empire's immense force. Our heroes are wounded, yet saved by Hilda and Minwu, but not without tragedy. We're now orphaned, and in this installment, our characters finally have a voice, which is fitting because I only renamed one after myself. So we have Muzings, Maria, Guy, and Leon, who's notably absent for most of the game. So we have a rotating fourth to fill in during plot-relevant moments. The development between everyone was pretty weak. Maria occasionally mentions Leon or points out the obvious. Guy is a bit mentally slow and never has much to say. And it's not until the end that we discover Leon, whom I think is the most important and thematic character here, and I'll explain why soon. But in the meantime, we pledge our loyalty to the cause, in which we must first prove ourselves. Princess Hilda's fiancé, Prince Scott of Cashin, is killed by a traitor to the rebellion, a travesty that adds to the motivation. We have to secure resources from the north, Mithril, to make powerful weapons and armaments. Here a man named Joseph will help us in exchange for saving the villagers from a work camp, rescue his daughter, and kill the traitor. Only then will he lead us to the Mithril we require for the rebellion. Next, we're tasked with destroying a massive dreadnought airship, but fail. The princess is captured off-screen, multiple locations are bombed, and we later see the devastating aftermath of our failures. The rebel hideout received minimal damage, capitalizing on the consequence of rebellion. We'll extrapolate more on this later as well. We later get a chance to redeem ourselves by destroying the dreadnought during its rearming and rescuing our rebellion leader, the Princess Hilda, and being confronted by a familiar Dark Knight. Regardless of this minor victory, it doesn't bring back the lost lives. Those lives are still caked into the craters. We're then tasked with making contact with that of the Dragoons, who can communicate with wyverns, making them powerful allies. During these travels, we slash and gash some more pirates, and acquire an airship of our own through Sid. Finally, we resist the allure of the beautiful doppelganger princess, or do we? Guys, wait outside. Oh, come here, baby. Let me show you my weapons. Whoa, never mind. And rescue the real princess, once again. In the meantime, we have to find Minwu, who traveled to Mysidia, the land of the mages, to find the Ultima Magic Tomb. En route, we get swallowed by Leviathan, and meet others, like this Dragoon, that have been trapped inside the monster who've just decided that this is their new life now. As a side note, Mysidia Tower was long as hell, but eventually we acquire the sacred magic. With the Dragoons and Wyvern's help, we can enter the castle, which was guarded by a cyclone, to kill the Emperor, which was underwhelming. There's a celebration of victory. The Queen and our heroes dance the night away, at least until some poor sap comes in to warn of the Dark Knight usurping the throne. Oh, right. Forgot about him. He intends to finish what the Emperor started, so our victory fanfare is short-lived. And I have to admit, this bamboozle had me fooled. I actually thought this was the end of the game, much like our characters. Eventually, we learn that the Dark Knight is Leon, the youngster that was lost at the beginning of the game. As we approach to stop him, we're interrupted by the Emperor, now resurrected, who renounces his previous goal of conquering the Empire for a new goal, overtaking the world. Ricard the Dragoon sacrifices himself for the others to escape via Wyvern, and this sacrifice has an effect on Leon. His loyalty shifts. he realizes he needs to help the team or more will die. After understanding what they must do, our team of orphans travel to the underworld, Pandemonium, from where the monsters originate. After a challenging confrontation, our heroes conquer the monstrosity that is the Emperor. We get to party some more, and we finally reach the true end of the game. Leon departs to seek isolation, still suffering from his actions against the rebellion. But honestly, it doesn't feel right just letting him go. He is directly responsible for much of the casualties of the war, in which he carried out a leadership role for the evil Emperor. Final Fantasy II explores the themes of rebellion. Rebels are those that rise against opposition, an armed resistance against an established authority. Here we have a malign force attempting to seize control and enact change. A group of people disagree with the ideology or methodology and seek to combat it. This entry gives us a look at the primary consequence of resistance. An often overlooked and recurring consequence of rebellion is that of collateral damage. Our initial encounter of casualties in this manner result from the bombings of the dreadnought mentioned earlier. And I'm happy to see the people and leaders take note of the death and suffering caused by their opposition. That sounds bad. Rather, I'm glad they showed the destruction and toll it takes on the leadership. Whether the rebels' cause is justified or not, there are always going to be casualties, and justifiability is merely subjective. Here we have a litmus test, that of the doppelganger that mirrors our movements and prevents our progression. After we put a special mask on a statue in Mycedia, we can return to the doppelganger, who is now frozen in place, apparently by the purity of our hero. The doppelganger is still enough to equip an opposite mask to it, making the doppelganger disappear. It reveals that we are a force fighting for good, or at least as determined by the moral compass of the mystical forces around us. I don't know if this is an analogy or ancient tale or something, maybe you can let me know in the comments. But now that we've determined that we're good, as ordained by the forces of nature, it raises an interesting question touched on through Leon. Leon utters the most thematic and appropriate line of the game. How many lives did the rebels throw away when they chose to oppose the Empire? Leon's actions remains true to these ideals, that joining the opposition rather than fighting it might be worth it just to save lives. But there's always a cost. Is preventing the death of more worth sacrificing or alterations of your own freedoms? As it stands, our heroes currently choose to stop his ascension to the throne. But the Emperor's resurrection and Leon's subsequent shift in loyalty raise further questions. Like, can an enemy redeem themselves if they turn sides and fight for the good side? The answer lies within your own moral systems. In my personal opinion, I think yes. Despite Leon contributing mass suffering and death, it can be counterbalanced. Since he was willing to kill and deprive others of their rights, he should be forced to live for, not with, in a servitude role. Because if he's killed or imprisoned, there's absolutely nothing to gain from a corpse. But if he can be used to protect those he once harmed from worldly dangers or sacrifice himself protecting important people, something along those lines, it's better than just throwing him to the wolves. The idea is that in the next 40 years of his life, he ends up helping more people than he's ever hurt in that short span of the war. This punishment will overall be more beneficial to society than any form of retribution or revenge, but rather reformation and rehabilitation. If he refuses, then we kill him. But getting back, if you're on the good side, leading rebellion, how many lives are worth achieving your goal? You may even have the same blood on your hands as the enemy. Typically, rebellions consist of those that are in agreement with the changes the rebellion is poised to bring. Those that join should already be aware of the risk. Minwu, Joseph, Ricard all join the main party throughout the story, all recruited or convinced to ally with the rebels. And all of them die through various means. Joseph, for example, is crushed by a boulder while saving the party. Furthermore, hammering home the point that casualties and risk are intertwined with rebellion. Ironically, our main characters are partially shielded from such risk. They've already lost their parents, and not as a consequence of their reactions, because it happened at the opening of the war. They're pushed into the rebellion as more of a vengeance turned save humanity plot, whereas the other rebels are motivated by securing the lives of their loved ones, the people they care about that may suffer the consequences of one's rebellion. So the heroes don't really experience the risk of losing more than the other rebels, or more than the civilians that would rather conform to protect their families. So while I think they missed the mark with our main character, Maria and Guy, I think Leon salvages the themes with his own actions, despite being absent most of the game. In fact, I think it would be better if our heroes join the rebellion as ambitious, naive youngsters, and instead save the death of their parents until the bombings of the Dreadnought, a result of the failed sabotage attempt by our thoughtless heroes. This would bring them more in line with the risk of the other rebels, and reinforce the rebellion and consequence themes to bring real perspective to our characters, leading to growth. Final Fantasy II teaches us that we have to understand both cause and consequence of rebellion, to carefully choose the side that reflects our values, and to consider who or what we're risking as a result of our decisions. To understand the causes that we fight for teaches us about ourselves. It puts into perspective how much we're willing to risk at the expense of our cause, of our justice. Truly understanding your cause and what motivates you protects you from being misled or your views distorted, whether by your own ambitions or charlatans, like the Emperor's changing focus from conquering nations to conquering the world. It also guards you from being used to achieve someone else's goal, like the Emperor's manipulation of Leon. If we understand the factors that force people to become rebels, maybe certain adjustments can be made in lieu of armed resistance. Perhaps there is room for diplomacy, and we can avoid further casualties. But if we must fight, it is our responsibility and duty as people and citizens to know these factors in order to have a proper sense of conviction and justice for our cause.